Hello everyone, this is Attack the Backlog, the podcast where I, Marc, tries to make a dent in their backlog one game at a time. This here episode is all about Little Nightmares, a puzzle platform where you play as a little girl in a big world full of disgusting humanoid monsters, some of which look like they may just be what Garbage Pail Kids become when they grow up. They are gross, they are mean, and they'll come after you if you are seen. Little Nightmares originally came out on PC, PS4, and Xbox One back in April of 2017 and made its way to Switch a year later. Now, Little Nightmares is a tricky game to talk about. Tricky because it's good, but not great. It's the kind of game I would never go out of my way to recommend, but if someone directly asked me, hey, have you heard of this game called Little Nightmares? It looks kinda interesting. Then I'd give it a recommendation. Not a glowing one, of course, but a moderate one. And that shouldn't be taken as a negative because it's not a negative. So many games fall into that good but not great category. They are the games people enjoy in the moment and forget soon after, which is exactly the kind of game Little Nightmares is. And because of that, this episode may end up being surprisingly short, and like Little Nightmares, it will probably be mostly forgettable. If there's one thing I might remember about Little Nightmares, it's the presentation. The lighting, sound, and character design / animation all go a long way in creating a very uncomfortable and unpleasant atmosphere, one which made me interested in seeing what was behind the next door, even though the areas themselves aren't anything special. The presentation more than made up for that with a handful of monsters who look, sound, and move in disturbing ways. I wouldn't say the monsters are scary, but they're the kind of people I wouldn't want to be around. In other words, if I was walking down the street and saw one of these things walking towards me, I'd cross the street, call a cab, go to the airport, and fly to the other side of the country. You're probably saying, why wouldn't you just call an Uber instead? In which case, I'd reply, I don't do Uber. And then you'd say, also, you don't call an Uber. It's an app. Get with the times, Grandpa. And then I'd say, I identify as non-binary, and the word grandpa indicates identifying as a person of the male persuasion, so you'd be wrong to call me a grandpa. And if you try to say grandpa is actually short for the non-binary grandparent, I would call you a liar and immediately set your pants on fire. And then you'd say, why are you talking about Little Nightmares? And then I'd say, oh yeah, that's what this episode's about. The first monster you run into is a blind man with exceptionally long arms, long enough to grab you when you think you're out of reach. Honestly, I didn't really care for this particular enemy. The way it moved was a bit stiff, and if it made unique noises, I don't remember a single one. It's just kind of a normal human with long arms and short legs, and it would have been way more interesting if it was more monkey-like in the way it behaved. But when you reach the next area, you come across these massive, flabby chefs who chase after you, letting out an eerie scream whenever they see you, breathing heavily as they try to reach for you when you're hiding under a table. The way they move and the way they sound made me never want to go anywhere near them. Not to mention they are by far the grossest looking things in the game. Though, on the topic of getting too close and inevitably caught by one of these monsters, I was disappointed to discover there aren't many brutal deaths in Little Nightmares when you get caught. The long-armed man and the weird-ass chefs will just pick you up and start taking you wherever it is they're supposed to take you. I'm not saying I want or like seeing little girls brutally murdered, but just that I kind of expected it, given the Nightmares title. Limbo, this is not. In addition to Mr. Longarms and the chubby chef brothers, there are many large but not in charge guests you'll have to deal with in the later areas, as well as the woman running everything, who is just a normal slender woman with telekinesis powers, only standing out because she's just a normal being in a world full of anything but normal beings. Rewinding back to the guests, as much as I think the chefs are the most disturbing beings in the game, it's the guests that came the closest to scaring me. This is because all the guests care about is shoving as much food down their throats as possible, and when they see you, all they see is another piece of meat. In fact, if a guest grabs you, they'll actually swallow you whole, though I still would have liked to have seen a little leg peeking out of their mouth as they chewed you up. But what you gonna do when they come for you? Bad boys, bad boys, But you're a bad little girl, aren't you? Wait, what are you talking about again? At one point in the game, you have to walk across a table and avoid the greasy, grabby hands of the guests in order to progress, which is very unpleasant, though also very annoying because it seemed awfully easy for them to grab me. And then there was a point where a bunch of guests fall to the floor and become a giant blob of fleshy limbs and mouths wanting nothing more than to eat you right up. It is by far the scariest part of the game and one of the few moments that stands out as potentially memorable. The other being when a gnome, these little creatures who inhabit the world, tries to help you by offering some food and you end up eating them instead. I told you were a bad little girl. But for the most part, a lot of what you're doing isn't all that exciting. Little Nightmares is a basic platformer with basic puzzles, and it's basically alright. I'm happy I finally got around to playing it, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little disappointed. Just a little bit. I expected more horrifying creatures, some horrifying environments, and more scares than I ended up getting. But Little Nightmares is more tame than the name suggests, but then again, it's only Little Nightmares after all, and not big ones. There are a few DLC episodes as well, however I found them to be much weaker than the main game, in part because you play as a way less interesting boy who looks very plain, especially compared to the young girl who stands out thanks to her bare feet and yellow raincoat. The boy kind of reminds me of the yokai Kitaro from the anime Gegege no Kitaro. He's just very, very plain looking. But the real problem isn't who you're playing, but what you're doing. I only played the first 2 episodes and found them more annoying than anything else. The first episode involves a lot of jumping from one object to another while avoiding a monster underwater, and the second has you using the gnomes to help you progress, gnomes which are prone to falling behind, and it all ends up feeling like more of a babysitting simulator than anything else. I didn't even bother with the third episode because I felt like the first 2 were starting to taint my feelings of the main game, and I didn't want that. Speaking of that will do it for this here episode of Attack the Backlog. Once again, I am your host, Marc. Y'all can find me on Twitter and pretty much everywhere at PXSausage. The site is, of course, pixelatedsausage.com, where you can find this podcast and the Pixelated Sausage podcast, both of which are available on podcast services across the globe, like Stitcher Radio, Google Play, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Pandora. And if you'd like to check out the video version of this here show or the Pixelated Sausage podcast, you can go over to youtube.com/pixelatedsausage and watch them both there. If you'd like to check out the art I make, you can go over to pxsart.com. If you see something you like, click the link and it'll take you to where you can purchase a print of the piece you fancy. And if you fancy the site in general and anything that we do, please go over to patreon.com/pxs and support us that way. As always, thank you for watching or listening. I hope you enjoyed this here episode, and I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day. And when you sleep tonight, I hope your nightmares hurry a little.